everyone started walking through the forest, which was filled with fog and strange animals. Jianying was in front, followed by Lu Fan, who had his hands in his pants pockets. Xiao Man turned her head towards Lu Fan and calmly asked him how he had chosen this secret realm since it was level 42 on the fear difficulty scale. Qin Q, who was behind her and holding the magic staff with both hands, simply stood silently contemplating the area, while on the other side his aunt was quite scared. Lu Fan slightly turned his head back, began to look at Xiao Man with a joyful gaze, and with a smile explained to her that he had been searching in the realm hall for a long time and had not found anything with a higher level of expertise than this. Upon hearing this, Xiao Man couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. She explained to him that she hadn't meant to say this. At the same time, Lu Fan's aunt took out a bag and, while holding it with both hands, closed her eyes, started smiling and asked them to wait for a moment because if they were going to have to fight, she wanted to share this with everyone. The bag contained excellent quality travel biscuits. They were like food. The effect was that they increased experience gained by 20% for the next 3 hours after consuming them. Seeing this, Lu Fan couldn't help but smile and think that this was very useful. With these biscuits, they were going to quickly reach the second transition level. Lu Fan, Qin Q, and Xiao Man took a biscuit and started eating it. They found it delicious. Aunt Han Qi, who was holding the bag of biscuits, turned her head towards them, closed her eyes, and with a pleasant smile explained to them that these cookies came from a recipe distributed by the professional life professor. Many classmates of hers had not been able to make them. Fortunately, the charming chef had a high success rate in adding effects. They succeeded on their first attempt. While Jianying was walking peacefully, Aunt Han Qi caught her attention. Upon hearing her voice, she turned her head back and began to wonder what she wanted. Aunt Han Qi, who was holding the bag of biscuits, approached her. She offered the cookies and with a pleasant smile advised her to try them as well. Jianying began to look at her with a surprised look and couldn't help but wonder why she was so kind. She turned her body back, started looking at the biscuits, and asked the aunt if the cake that Lu Fan had given her last time had been made by her. She closed her eyes and with a smile, she replied yes. She also added that if she had liked the cake, then she could make more for her. While the two of them were talking, Qin Q and Xiao Man approached them. With a pleasant smile, Qin Q explained to her that Sister Han's cooking was really delicious. They lived nearby, so if she felt free, she could come whenever she wanted. Although at first Jianying started looking at them with an indifferent look, later she couldn't help but start smiling. Lu Fan, who was walking in the area, turned his head to one side and saw something moving among the bushes. With a serious look, he caught the attention of the others and asked them to be careful. Upon hearing his voice, Xiao Man and Aunt Han Qi turned their heads back and went on high alert. A snake with black scales and green eyes approached them. They had been spotted by a monster. This monster was the level 40 black-scaled python. It had 9120 experience points, the material called Python Poison Fan, and 1740 dragon points. It has two abilities. The first one was called Poison Fang, which allowed it to inflict a layer of toxin on the bitten target, each layer reducing the maximum health of the target by 10%. Its second ability was called Death Coil, which allowed it to restrain the target, immobilizing them and causing them to lose 10% of their HP every 5 seconds. Upon seeing the snake, Xiao Man gathered momentum and began moving towards it. Then, she unsheathed her sword and prepared to attack. Aunt Han Qi quickly put away the biscuits. Seeing that Xiao Man was ready to attack, Qin Q reached out her hand towards her and with a surprised look asked her to wait. Lu Fan was somewhat confused as he didn't know why she was rushing so much. The snake opened its mouth and prepared to attack. Seeing this, Xiao Man tightly grabbed the sword and started attacking. Qin Q, who was holding the magic staff with both hands, explained to them that the monsters here were all level 40 or higher, so they couldn't easily defeat them. Aunt Han Qi started sweating and couldn't help but feel scared. She looked at Xiao Man and explained that she could prepare some food to increase their resistances, but first she needed to gather some ingredients. With a calm look, Lu Fan told them that this problem was not necessary. After saying this, he extended his hand to the side, causing a magical ball to start appearing. He began to look at his hand and gave them the order to focus only on fighting as he would take care of these problems. The energy emanating from his hand began to spread everywhere. Xiao Man turned her head back and asked him what he was going to do. Jianying remained calm. She began to look at Lu Fan with a serious gaze and realized that he was going to summon his dragon. Several seconds later, the little dragon appeared. Upon seeing this, they couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Xiao Man began to look at the dragon with a confused look and asked Lu Fan if this was a dragon. The little dragon climbed onto Lu Fan's head. He closed one eye and with a pleasant smile asked Xiao Fei not to sit on his head, calling it mischievous. Upon hearing the name Xiao Fei, Qin Qiu couldn't help but be surprised. Seeing that this dragon wasn't Xiao Yi, she realized that Lu Fan actually had two dragons. Aunt Han Qi was amazed and asked him where this dragon had come from and why she had never seen it before. Giant Ying simply started staring at the dragon and remained silent. While they were distracted, the snake prepared to attack Xiao Man. Upon seeing this, she quickly realized that this was not good. Lu Fan began to look at the snake and with a calm gaze, he gave Xiao Fei the order to use the emerald light. Upon hearing his command, Xiao Fei used the ability, and the gem that was on its chest began to shine. With a sinister look, the snake swung its tail and attacked Xiao Man. But at that moment, a green shield appeared in front of her, blocking the attack and preventing her from getting hurt. Due to the enormous force of the attack, she was thrown backwards and fell to the ground. Upon seeing this, Qin Qiu began to approach her and prepared to heal her. Above Xiao Man's head were 3 leaves, one of them disappeared. She started to sit up and couldn't help but wonder if the damage she had just received had been blocked. Xiao Fei had used the Emerald Light ability, which applied 3 layers of Emerald Blessing to the target, removing all negative effects and increasing all attributes by 30%. Each layer of blessing could block 1 instance of damage. Lu Fan began to stroke Xiao Fei's head and with a smile explained to Xiao Man that this was correct. He also added that with Xiao Fei here, everyone could relax. There was no need to worry about debuffs or injuries. Qin Qiu sat behind Xiao Man and using her power, she began to heal her wounds. She started looking at Xiao Fei with a serious gaze and upon seeing that its ability removed debuffs, blocked damage, and increased attributes all in one skill, she realized that its ability was even better than a 2nd level priest. Xiao Man, who was sitting in front of her, couldn't help but be amazed and think that dragons were very powerful. Even a small dragon could block damage and increase all of her attributes. While they were distracted, the snake approached them, opened its mouth, and prepared to attack. Upon seeing this, Aunt Han Qi went into shock and told her that it was charging towards them. Lu Fan unsheathed the dagger, stared at the snake with a determined look, and decided to take care of it. But just before he could make a move, a powerful red light shot out towards the snake. Seeing this, Lu Fan couldn't help but be shocked and start to wonder what was happening. Aunt Han Qi closed her eyes, moved aside, and started screaming. The red light was actually an energy arrow. Just before the snake could attack, the arrow pierced its mouth. The person who had launched this attack was none other than Giant Ying. Several seconds later, the sword returned to her hands. She began to look towards the ground and asked them not to waste any more time. Everyone was in shock as they couldn't believe that she had killed the snake with a single strike. Giant Ying grabbed the sword with one hand, turned her head to the side, and revealed to everyone that they were now the targets of the monsters. She had a hidden combat class, she was level 21. And she had the Sword Master class. Her sword was called Bloodbreaker, level 21. It was of epic quality and exclusive to the exclusive class called Sword Master. It had 3947 strength points, 126 agility points. It had 2 abilities. The first one called Armor Breaker. It ignored 30% of the target's defense when dealing damage. The second ability was called Agility. It increased the speed of the Sword Master by 40%. While the snake's body was falling to the ground, Lu Fan began to look at her with a surprised expression and couldn't help but be amazed and think that this was how a sword master attacked. He no longer had any doubt that the strength of number 2 was truly impressive. Giant Ying turned her body to one side and threw the sword again. Lu Fan unsheathed his dagger, started running towards Aunt Han Qi, and asked her to crouch down. Upon hearing Lu Fan's voice, Aunt Han Qi turned her body towards them and began to look at them with a confused gaze, wondering what he was referring to. The reality was that a spider approached her from behind and with a murderous look, it prepared to attack using one of its sharp legs. The spider attacked the ant, but at that moment, Jiang Ying's sword struck its leg, changing the course of the attack. Lu Fan threw himself towards the ant, grabbed her by the neck, and both fell to the ground, narrowly avoiding the attack. The spider took several steps back and began to stare fixedly at Jiang Ying. The silver-armored exoskeleton of the spider was very strong, and it was immune to the effect of breaking through the armor of the Shadow Swordsman. This giant spider was called Silver Armored Spider. It had 15,750 experience points and the material called Silver Armor Shell, along with 4110 dragon coins. It had 3 abilities. The first one was Poisonous Fangs. It bit the target, infecting it with a layer of poison. Each layer reduced the target's maximum health by 10%. The second ability was called Mandible Piercing. It balanced its front limbs, piercing 2 targets simultaneously. If it failed, then it could use the ability once again. The third ability was called Silver Armor, which made it immune to armor-breaking effects. Lu Fan grabbed Aunt Han-Ki by the shoulders and helped her sit down. She placed both hands on the ground. The sword returned to Giant Ying. She gained momentum, started moving quickly towards the spider, and with a determined look, prepared to attack. Lu Fan and Aunt Han-Ki looked to the side, and upon seeing that she was ready to attack, they couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. The spider raised its sharp leg, began staring at Giant Ying, and used the skill Mandible Piercing. It started attacking her, but she began moving at a high speed and effortlessly dodged the attack. Upon seeing this, it used the Mandible Piercing skill again, but she moved once more and evaded the attack, causing the skill to fail. Once the spider could no longer use its ability, she jumped and prepared to counterattack. Seeing this, Lu Fan grabbed the dagger with one hand, tightly clenched his other fist, started moving towards them, and with a serious look caught Giant Ying's attention, asking her to be careful. She turned her body backwards and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. At that moment, using the dagger, Lu Fan delivered a strong blow under the spider's jaw. In a matter of seconds, the spider lost its life and fell to the ground. While Giant Ying was flying in the air, she turned her body to one side and with a serious look asked Lu Fan not to let his guard down. Lu Fan landed on the spider's corpse, began to look at her and couldn't help but wonder what she was talking about. Not far from them there were some bushes, and behind it more silver-armored spiders were hidden. While she was flying, she extended her hands to the sides, making two more swords appear. The black sword was called Breaking Army Great Sword, level 21. It was of epic quality and exclusive to the Sword Master class. It had an ability called Mountain Shaker, which inflicted 210% physical damage and spread 21% of the damage to surrounding enemy targets. The blue sword was called Water Cold Sword, level 14. It was of excellent quality and also exclusive to the Sword Master class. It had an ability called Frost. It inflicted ice attribute damage and reduced the target's movement speed by 30%. She began to stare fixedly at the spiders and revealed to Lu Fan that not only were there silver-armored spiders, but behind them was a giant spider web with a giant black spider in the middle known as the Black Web Hunter. This spider was level 46. It had 39,110 experience points, spider eyes material, and 7519 dragon coins. It had two abilities, the first one called Poison Fang. It bit the target, infecting it with a layer of poison, each layer reducing the target's maximum health by 10%. The second ability was called Web Blind. It wrapped the captured target in a cobweb, and after 60 seconds the target died. The silver-armored spider began to advance quickly towards them and prepared to attack. Upon seeing this, Lu Fan and Giant Ying decided not to stand idly by. While the swords were floating around her, she began to advance towards the spider. Lu Fan put Xiao Fei on his back, took the dagger with his other hand, and while advancing towards the spider, he turned his head to Giant Ying, and upon seeing that her weapons were all exclusive to her profession, he thought they were not common weapons. The spider used one of its sharp legs and attacked them, but they jumped and dodged the attack without much effort. While she was in the air, she began to stare at the spider and explained to Lu Fan that swordsmen could forge their own weapons. Each one started with a sword at level 1 and could level it up. After saying this, she began to spin her body and prepared to attack. She extended her hands towards the spider and threw the Water Cold Sword. The sword transformed into an arrow, and then she used the Frost ability. The sword started moving towards the spiders and slowly began to freeze their bodies. She landed on the ground, extended her hands to the sides, started staring at the spiders, and explained to Lu Fan that now was not the time to be talking about this. Lu Fan began looking at her with a serious look and thought that her profession was similar to a dragon tamer. He could level up his pet dragons, and she could improve her weapons. While Giant Ying was distracted, another spider appeared behind her. It opened its mouth and with a sinister look, prepared to attack. She slightly turned her head back and remained calm. Just before the spider could attack, Lu Fan appeared and blocked the attack using his dagger. He stared at the spider intently and gave Xiao Fei the order to use Emerald Light. Upon hearing his command, Xiao Fei started flying. It extended its hands towards Giant Ying and used the ability Emerald Light, causing its chest to start glowing. 3 leaves appeared above her head. She started looking at Lu Fan with a surprised look and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. She decided not to stand idly by and decided to help Lu Fan. She clenched her fist tightly, extended the other hand towards the spider, began staring at it intently, and used the mountain shaker ability. She extended her hand towards the spider, and in the blink of an eye, the black sword began to move towards the spider, piercing its chest and armor in the process. In a matter of seconds, the spider lost its life. While holding onto the water-cold sword with one hand, she turned her body back and started looking at Lu Fan with a joyful expression, thanking him for the 30% buff. After defeating the spider, her water-cold sword leveled up to 15. While the little dragon Xiao Fei was flying beside him, he started looking at Giant Ying and with a smile thought that her breaking army great sword was agile and piercing, and the water-cold sword served to block and increase damage. By combining the three swords, her profession was very versatile. After defeating the spider, little Xiao Fei leveled up to level 2. While they were distracted, someone started screaming and asking for help. Upon hearing this, Lu Fan and Giant Ying began to look in the direction from which the scream had come, and upon seeing what was happening, they couldn't help but be shocked. Several spiders surrounded Aunt Han-Ki and the others. She fell to the ground and couldn't help but start feeling scared. But luckily, Kin-Ku and Xiao Man were here. She grabbed the magic staff with one hand, extended her other hand towards the spiders, stood in front of her, and with a serious look gave Xiao Man the order to protect Han-Ki. Upon hearing her command, Xiao Man unsheathed her sword, stood behind Aunt Han-Ki, and prepared to defend her from the spiders. Upon seeing this, Lu Fan couldn't help but panic. He started running towards them, and while little Xiao Fei was following him, he decided to go and deal with the spiders himself. He asked Giant Ying to go find the black web hunter. Giant Ying placed her hand on her chest, began looking at the ground, and couldn't help but start smiling. The spiders prepared to attack. Upon seeing this, Xiao Man prepared to defend Han-Ki, and Kin-Ku began using her power, causing her magic staff to start glowing. Aunt Han-Ki, who was sitting on the ground, started looking sideways and couldn't help but feel scared. At that moment, Xiao Fei appeared above her. It extended its hands towards her and used the Emerald Light ability, causing 3 leaves to appear above her head. Lu Fan began killing the spiders and asked Giant Ying to be careful not to fall into the web bind, as if she was caught, it was likely that she wouldn't be able to escape and would end up dying. Upon hearing this, she began to look at Lu Fan with a surprised expression and couldn't help but wonder why he was so concerned about her. While she was distracted and lost in her own thoughts, 5 spiderwebs started approaching her from behind. It didn't take long for her to notice this and thought that it wasn't good. Luckily, she reacted in time, turned around, and using her sword blocked a spiderweb. And luckily, Xiao Fei's Emerald Light ability created 3 small shields blocking 3 spiderwebs. She couldn't block the last spiderweb which grazed her arm, causing a deep cut. Feeling pain, she clenched her teeth tightly and thought that this was not good at all. An armored silver spider appeared and prepared to attack. Upon seeing this, she placed her hand on the wound and started running towards the forest. Seeing that she was injured, Lu Fan asked her not to venture alone. He turned his head towards her and with a worried look, he asked Xiao Fei to go heal her. At that moment, Kin-Ku caught his attention. While she was running and attacking the spiders, she asked Lu Fan to go help Giant Ying. Xiao Man, who was sitting on the ground and blocking the spider's attack with her sword, explained to him that with Xiao Fei's Emerald Light they would be able to endure. Upon hearing this, Lu Fan started running in the direction Giant Ying had fled. Little Xiao Fei began flying and following him. With a serious look, he decided to go help her and let them take care of Aunt Han-Ki. Lu Fan ventured into the forest. In front of him there were a lot of spiderwebs. He started looking ahead and upon seeing what his eyes were witnessing, he couldn't help but be shocked and wonder what was happening. In front of him was the giant web of the black web hunter. In the middle was the spider. It had trapped one of Giant Ying's swords, who was standing on the ground and holding another sword with one hand. Lu Fan approached, and now that he had found her, he decided to help her. She was very injured and had small cuts all over her body. While holding the sword with one hand, she placed the other hand on the wound, closed one eye, started looking at the spider with the other, clenched her teeth tightly and thought this wasn't good. Seeing that she was injured, Lu Fan quickly advanced towards the spider, looked at it with a serious gaze, extended a hand to the side and gave Xiao Fei the order to use Emerald Light. Upon hearing his command, Xiao Fei used the Emerald Light ability. 3 leaves reappeared above her head. She turned her body backwards and asked Lu Fan not to intervene as she could handle the spider on her own. At that moment, the black web hunter used the web blind ability, which wrapped the captured target in a spider web. The target would die after 60 seconds. The spider began to shoot a web towards Giant Ying. She slightly turned her head back, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but start sweating and panicking. Thinking that she was in danger, Lu Fan appeared beside her, caught her attention, and asked her not to get distracted. Then he stood in front of her, stared at the spider intently, and asked Giant Ying to follow him. He extended his hand forward and used the ability called Dragon Claw, which allowed him to transform his arm into a dragon claw, whose power depended on the dragon. In a matter of seconds, his hand transformed into a dragon's claw. Upon seeing this, Giant Ying couldn't help but be amazed. She didn't know what was happening. Lu Fan extended the dragon claw backwards, placed his other hand in front of his face, began to stare fixedly at the spider, and with a determined look prepared to attack. He launched a strong attack towards the spider, cutting off several legs of the spider and releasing Giant Ying's sword in the process. She couldn't help but be in shock. She couldn't believe that a single strike from Lu Fan had left the black web hunter seriously injured. She reached out her hand towards the sword, and as her hand was glowing, she began to look at Lu Fan with a surprised expression. There was very little difference between Lu Fan's attack and hers. His attack was as strong as her mountain shaker ability. Lu Fan unsheathed his dagger, stared at the spider, and told Giant Ying that it was time to attack together. He used the ability called Spiritual Wind Language, which granted the bearer the blessing of spiritual wind, increasing agility attribute by 5%. Lu Fan started running towards the spider. Giant Ying reached out her hand towards him and used the Mountain Shaker ability, which allowed her to inflict 210% physical damage and disperse it to nearby enemy targets. Lu Fan used the ability called Dragon Fang Strike, which allowed him to channel Dragon Breath to deliver a powerful blow with his current weapon. Both of them attacked the Black Web Hunter and effortlessly cut the spider's body in half. The attributes of her Bloodbreaker sword increased, strength increased by 5,031 points, and agility increased by 163 points. She started looking at Lu Fan, and while she was starting to blush, she began to wonder why she felt so calm despite the great difference in skills. A system window appeared to inform Lu Fan that Xiao Fei had reached level 3. The little dragon Xiao Fei closed its eyes and started playing with Lu Fan's arm. He turned his head towards the dragon, and with a smile, he thought that this wasn't bad at all. He had killed a few monsters and Xiao Fei had already reached level 3. If he completed the mission, then Xiao Fei would reach level 5. While he was distracted, Giant Ying caught his attention. She began to look down and explained to him that she was surprised because she had experienced a difficult situation in which she had been weak and received help. Lu Fan slightly turned his head back, started looking at her, and remained silent while deep in thought. Qin Q, Xiao Man, and Aunt Han Qi appeared. She raised the magic staff in the sky and informed them that they had already arrived. She began to look at Lu Fan, and while blushing, she explained to him that they had already finished off all the silver armored spiders. Aunt Han Qi closed her eyes and with a smile, she told him that she had just leveled up. Lu Fan caught Giant Ying's attention and praised her for being strong. Upon hearing his voice, she turned her body back and started looking at him with a confused gaze. He began to look at her, and with a smile, he told her that even though she was stronger than them, they would not allow their teammates to fight alone. Giant Ying started looking at Lu Fan with a loving gaze and couldn't help but start blushing. The little dragon Xiao Fei sat on Lu Fan's head. Aunt Han Qi approached him and asked why he didn't use the Emerald Light ability on himself. He put his hand on his waist, closed his eyes, and with a smile explained to her that he didn't need to use the ability on himself. Xiao Man put her hands on her waist and asked Lu Fan to quickly use his dragon to heal everyone. Lu Fan gave the order to Xiao Fei to use the Life Source ability, which applied Life Source to all allied targets, continuously restoring their health. Xiao Fei lifted its head, closed its eyes, and the gem it had on its chest began to shine. A barrier appeared around them and began to heal them. Qin Q started looking at the dragon and couldn't help but smile and feel full of energy, as if she could fight again. Xiao Man closed her eyes, put her hand on her belly, and while laughing out loud, she told Lu Fan that he had a green head. Upon hearing this, Lu Fan began to look at Xiao Man and asked Little Fei not to heal Xiao Man again in the future. While they were talking, Giant Ying started looking at them and couldn't help but start smiling. She couldn't help but feel happy. While she was blushing, with a joyful look, she thought that having teammates wasn't so unpleasant after all. Several minutes later, it started to get dark and they reached a cliff. While the little dragon Xiao Fei was sitting on Lu Fan's head, he put his hands on his waist and started looking down. Xiao Man, who was holding the tablet with one hand, began to touch her head with the other and thought that this was very strange since the map ended here. She didn't know if they had reached the end. While Lu Fan stood near the cliff, Xiao Man approached him and asked if there was still a large area ahead. He simply remained silent. Qin Q approached him, and as she looked down, Her expression changed drastically. She couldn't help but be shocked and start sweating. At the bottom of the cliff there were a bunch of spiders, and among them was the boss of this secret realm. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.